Richards trying to scoot in there alone. It pinballs to the crease.
Let's get it.
Oh my God! Here we go.
You're listening to the Pod Street Bullies podcast with your hosts, Derek.
How you gonna get it, Bobby?
John. Matt Casey.
Unnecessary, but totally necessary.
And Cody.
What's not to love?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the special edition, the pre-Pi Day edition.
The Tasha birthday edition.
The Tasha birthday edition. Finally, Derek Bob seems like he smartened up and kind of took back his idea of joining us tonight. It is me and Matt Casey. What's going on, brother?
Hey, how's it going? A little bit of news this week, John. A little bit of news.
A little bit. Of course, my entire family is dying right now. I mean, I don't know if you can tell in the old vocal cords a little bit, but like Reagan had the vomits. Then Lainey had the vomits as I started to get like a throat thing.
Oh,
Then the in-laws in the basement got the vomits. Then Reagan's got strep throat now. She's been in school for about as much time as Sean Couturier's played hockey in the past 2 years.
right.
We're falling apart at the seams. I was teaching math today, and don't worry, we got a lot to talk about. I was teaching math today. I'm standing up in the middle of the class, midday, like this. I could barely keep my eyes open.
I think this is a great time for a movie day, kids.
Right.
Wait,
there's a movie Pi Day, isn't there?
Do you have to go? Are you guys canceled tomorrow already? Or are you going in with this big nor'easter coming in?
I think we're getting rain.
I think I'm like just not going in. Be like, yeah, it's looking overcast. Not going in today.
Long Island, it's like there could be a chance of sprinkles, and they're just like, I'm Tammy outside Walmart, and here's Ned. Ned's got a shovel. Ned, are you ready for the snow? Yeah.
Oh man.
All right.
Speaking of, I mean, we gotta start on this a little bit. The big protest outside of the Wells Fargo Center with the Philadelphia Flyers finest.
I mean, I'm convinced it's because the Flyers already upchucked the boogie on Friday and fired Mr. Fletcher, and that was like the protest was like, you know what? Actually, the kids got soccer. I don't know if I need to attend, and the 12 of them showed up.
Oh, it was just an amazing cross section of Middle America right there. That was grade A, like Delco accents, like. Come on, Chuck. What the F, Chuck?
I really hope they all met up at the beginning with like at someone's house. We're going to Corey's house. Bring your sign. His grandma's making breakfast.
If people haven't watched, I think it was Crossing Broad that ended up putting on like a short little video, and it's like of just a 12-person protest complaining about Comcast Spectre, where it's like, yeah, that'll take them down.
I mean, listen, power to those guys. They stuck to their guns, right? They're with the modern day change makers.
This is the cherry on top of the cord cutting trend that's happened. This is what's going to put it over the top for Comcast.
Pretty much. Do we get to vote on the Nobel Peace Prize? Because
right.
These guys should really get at least a vote.
We'll do a documentary about it. It'll go head to head with the Navalny one that won last night.
I would watch the Comcast Spectacor protest documentary on the day it opened, my friend. That sounds like gummy-worthy material right there.
It's just a Greek tragedy right there. It's a Delco tragedy.
Well, I mean, we kind of alluded to the big news. I mean, there's all sorts of big news. I mean, there's a bunch of hypotheticals that we're going to touch on in a little bit, but Philadelphia Flyers, Friday, was it Anthony DeMarco at like 2:00 in the morning was the first one to break the news. It said something big was going to happen. Turned out Chuck Fletcher got the boot.
The comments before it was official though were great, where they're like, they're upping the price of insomnia cookies.
Yeah. At this point, right? I mean,
no shortage of smart asses in the Philadelphia fan base here.
so I feel like we all kind of knew that this was eventually going to happen, but then we're still a little hesitant on whether or not it would really happen. But to you, Casey, thinking about the timing, all of this, just like, what are your thoughts about? I mean, we could talk about his legacy in a minute, but just the Chuck Fletcher firing and the timing.
I'm actually pretty shocked that they did it when they did it. I think we all assumed that it was going to be done, and it was going to be done on April 13th or whenever the day after the last game would be. Like, that would have been, I think, the move. But I think they saw that, I know we touched on this last week, but it wasn't one specific move that Chuck made. It was the entire body of work over 4 or 5 year span that ended up culminating in a very horrific, yet again, trade deadline.
Yep.
And then on top of that, then you have the New York Rangers game, which I think really caught people's guard. And then you have the season ticket holder event where, despite his best efforts, what's that guy's name? Coates?
Steve Coates? Jim Coates? It looks like a Steve. Steve Coates.
Put him in a boat with no oars. Get him out of here.
Be better.
And
be better.
I think just the combination of that, it was just like, we have to do something to show that, you know what, fans, we actually hear your voice.
Right.
And this isn't something that we're going to ignore. And so I think at the very least, it's an acknowledgement of management that's like, this is not good enough. Chuck is not the guy. He's a nice guy, but like, nice doesn't get you the wins. So I don't think we're done. We'll get there, but I don't know. What was your take on it?
Well, I think for the first time in a really long time, the Flyers focused on optics, right? Over and over and over. We're like, okay, you said an aggressive retool. Then we sign Nick Delorier and, can't clear money for Johnny Hockey. We say, we're going to be sellers at the deadline and right. So it's like, finally, they're like, okay, I don't think that this franchise could get any more hostile. We need to do something. My guess is they already were going to do it at that point, where it was like they were going to do it in the off season, where it was just like, we got to pull the trigger now. Like, we have to do something to get this fan base at least like a little bit more bought in. And I think that immediately happened. I mean, I started watching the games again. I started reading, I'm like, okay, I have no idea where this is actually going to go, but it's something different. We're finally putting our foot back on the gas a little bit and going, okay, you got Dave Scott acknowledging this is no longer acceptable. We've got to do something about it.
I think you see, to put a metaphor on it, like we're just in this dark cave and finally we saw just like a little crack of light. And it's like, okay, we're finally, at least there's a little glimmer of hope. And like we joke about the fan base, which we're obviously a part of.
Of course.
And like, there are absolute mutants in this fan base, as I'm sure there are in every other fan base, but like,
I mean, some fan bases, that's all they have is mutants.
I think we have a pretty high potency of it, but if you look at the fanaticism of it, I think that the fans are responsible in some way, shape, or form of this, as you said, because of the optics. I'm trying to think of like the worst thing they could have done instead of this. It's like, here's the big news. We've released the gritty video game 2.0.
At the end of level 1, we signed Chuck Fletcher to a lifetime extension and JVR.
Right. And as such, you get a free demo of the Is This Trade Worth It app that Chuck touted.
The thing that I got to know, though, is did the original Lenny JVR get to bring out Chuck Fletcher to see the rabbits?
Yeah.
JVR, we got to go get my manual. I don't know where it is. All right, let's go, Chuck. What's that hopping around?
No, but I think you're right. I mean, I felt the same way that like, okay, finally our collective voice has been heard. They realize it. It's not like, I think they finally admitted that they just didn't have a plan.
Right.
And even if they did have a plan, it went to hell 2 years ago.
Right.
And I will say that, the early days of Chuck and his aggressiveness, I was like, okay, at least we're trying something. Unfortunately for him, and some of it's totally out of his control.
Right.
Fortunately for him, a lot of those moves went absolute bust. And then he doubled down on moves he should not have doubled down on.
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of brought it up, and I do want to take a second to kind of talk about Chuck Fletcher's body of work. It sounds so funny, but you look at a guy that I really think inherited an impossible job. I mean, a lot of the Philadelphia fan base who really is dedicated to the sport of hockey and really understands the sport of hockey, understand how bad of a place Ron Hextall left this franchise. I get it. He had a plan. It was a bad plan. He was not as much of a draft guru as everybody was giving him credit for. It was a nasty place that Chuck Fletcher comes in to try to fix. There's pressure to make the team good essentially immediately. Right? Because the Flyers, Illuminati, and ownership, they were
which they were. If you think back to the
right.
they were good. They were good.
Yeah. I mean, but the reality is that he didn't have the intestinal fortitude to continue to make big moves, right? He wasn't risky enough. It was a lot of lateral moves or the obvious ones, right? Kevin Hayes was the obvious move to make at the time. It was he was the big name center. We needed a center,
Nolan Patrick was a bust. Yeah.
There was nothing where, I mean, maybe initially oh, wow, Voracek for Atkinson. Wow, that's getting creative, but now it's you look back and you go, that was kind of a lateral move. That really didn't move the needle much. Yeah. And I feel for him because I do think that I still stick to this idea that I think he wanted to build through the draft and that there was pressure from above, because there were moments where you could kind of hear him talking about building the right way and through the draft. But I do think that there were pressures from other people where it's no, we need to do this.
Right. Yeah. I think back to the Hextall to Chuck transition. I think what you saw, if you remember back at the Hextall era, it was almost the polar opposite of what Chuck became. Hextall was so closed off to everyone. And in a weird way, good for him, I guess, for sticking to his guns. But clearly it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. It created factions within the organization between old guard and new guard. And Chuck came in, and you better believe that he was brought in knowing that it's hey, you have these advisors, you have these people around you that are going to help make decisions. And he probably was way too collaborative about the entire thing. And I think we've heard, I was listening to Meltzer and Jason this morning on their podcast, and they said as much, that it was just he probably was just paralyzed by trying to please everyone. At that point, you please nobody. And so I think you just saw two completely polar opposite personalities with Hextall and then Chuck. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you need to have some kind of comfortable medium where it's you want to give the guy support and a grounding board, but he's got to have the stones to make his own calls. Right. And that's where Chuck lacked.
Well, and I think that kind of transitions to kind of the next stage where we have Danny Briere as the interim general manager, and Dave Scott pretty much, it seems there's hints that he's kind of on his way out, and Dan Helferty might be the new Dave Scott. But the Flyers and Dave Scott saying that there are going to be two separate positions. We're not doing the GM and president of hockey ops as the same person.
Because that didn't work.
Which, when you hear a bunch of people talking about it, it's of course it didn't work. Yeah,
it sounded like just a flawed concept. And who was it when Hextall was in? Was Holmgren the president? I mean, and then they merged it with Chuck, and Chuck was like, "Oh boy, let's put this old Cambridge diploma to the test here."
Harvard,
and then, swing and a miss.
Right. But I am interested to see, because it's the assumption, and you kind of hinted to this, is that more change needs to happen, and the assumption is it's going to happen. I mean, everybody and their sister is saying that this is only the first shoe to drop. More will happen in the offseason, and it doesn't make any sense to do anything else right now.
Right. Yeah,
There's
you don't gain the benefit right now of doing it, of rushing in. You've made like the sacrificial lamb, and it was the right one.
Absolutely.
But right now, there's no rush in doing the rest. You can carefully figure it out. And also, you have to think through, like, if presumably the next position to be filled is the president of hockey operations.
Right.
And in a weird way, let's say hypothetically, Danny does stay. And let's debate that in a minute. But let's say hypothetically he does. It's like, we, in true Flyers fashion, we have started a rebuild in the complete opposite direction that you should have started it. You started with a coach and then a GM and then a president who inherits the two. And so it's almost like, okay, you better be sure you have a package deal together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that they all need to preach the same message. And I also think that, like, I think Danny understands that Torts is going to be a huge mouthpiece in this, and that he's going to have a major say in the hockey personnel, right? The team. You know, he's going to be the one who determines who's a part of this and who's not.
And I think, John, that's probably really important, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could do that with a lot of coaches. I don't necessarily see Dave Hackstall being a great, a great evaluator and standing up to the folks. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I mean, Seattle's doing a hell of a lot better than we are right now. But I feel like, in any business, and not to preach too much here, but in any business, if you're not getting the evaluation on the person who is like in charge of the product in general, and you're just making top-down decisions without getting bottom-up feedback, that's destined to fail. And that seems like that's what was happening.
Right. It's like my head of school leading all the parent-teacher conferences.
Yeah, exactly. Like, your kid looks like it's doing great. It's like, well, he's Mr. Gove's watching movies all day. I don't know how much the kid's learning.
He loves it. He pays a lot of attention. I teach it in all girls school. She loves it. But I think, like, not only does the president need to be somebody who will kind of like preach the same message, in my mind, it's got to be a hockey guy. I don't want a law background. I mean, if you went to business school like Danny Briere did, great, but I need somebody who was like had a stick in their hands.
Yeah. No, I think the name that, and then I want to go back to the GM thing in a second, but the name that was thrown out there, the one, the names that we've all heard from 32 Thoughts and things like that, it's like Eric Lindros, Chris Pronger. It's like, dude, really? Like that? I don't see that being a good fit. I would love to have them as part of the organization.
Sure.
Just not in that respect. You can't put them in charge in arguably their first job. Like, Pronger's running like a travel agency. He's running a VRBO.
Especially if you have Danny Briere, who's never been a general manager before.
Right. The name who I think makes sense, but honestly, he's still the familiarity is Shiro. And yes, his dad, is a legend and, will go down as one of the greatest coaches in Flyers history. But this guy's been through it. He's been through it in Pittsburgh. He's been through it in Jersey. And, people are like, well, he got let go in Jersey. He's like, that team was in the gutter for 7 years, including last year. And then they make a miraculous jump. That wasn't because the draft this past year. That's because of all the drafts that he helped, helped put together. So.
Yeah, I mean, I love that name. And then, the other names of just people who are going to be involved, like Ray Whitney, the not spitting chicklets one. I never know which one's which, but
I was going to say, don't get that guy in there.
Shane Doan, get kind of like the new old guard.
Yeah.
Get the 40-50 club, not the 70-80 club.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think you need guys that are, not to say that, some of the older guys aren't competitive, but I think you need guys who still have that like burn of like, oh, if I could just tie my skates up, I'd show these kids a thing or two. And you saw that, years and years ago with Bobby Clark when he was still like, much deeper involved in the organization. He's like, I'm lacing up and showing these little pricks how to do face-offs.
Right.
And now he does it. And he's like, my fingers hurt. And you're like, good news. We just extended quilting time by 3 hours today, Bobby.
I mean, and the reality is the game has changed so much since they were players.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean, crap, the game's changed so much as Danny Briere was a player. But it's
Yeah.
like there just comes a time where it's like, you're a nice face to have around as like a Flyers alum. If you
Right.
want to be the honorary alums and bang the gong every once in a while, like be my guest. You want to show your
Right.
face in a meeting and understand that you actually have no say.
I mean, I look at the guy who does it right. The guy who does it perfectly is Bernie Perron. Like he is, I don't like anytime I've been like in a box at Wells Fargo Center, he walks around, he
Yep.
glad hands people, he
Yep.
says hi, what's up, and then he like, I don't know if he drinks or not, but I'm sure he's just sitting there like having the free booze, having the free food,
Right.
like he's just enjoying that life, and like it's time for that generation,
Yeah.
the 70s, 80s generation, early 80s generation to do that.
Right.
And before they taint their legacy anymore. Because right now, like
Right.
people still want heads to roll. And guess what? They're next up on the platter that like, it's not gonna benefit anything for them sticking around.
Well, and it's because, and this is really with no inside knowledge. I mean, obviously you hear what the other insiders, as if I'm one,
Mhm.
what the insiders say, but like I think they're just as much to blame as Chuck
Mhm.
Fletcher, if
Yep.
not more to blame. So
And people have said they're like, oh well, he is not the advisors, quote unquote. And just to be specific, we're talking about Barber,
Holmgren, Barber, and
Holmgren,
Clark.
Clark. There's another guy,
And Lombardi.
Yeah. And from what we've been told, no, are they out there like shopping deals and whatnot? No,
Right.
but I've been told that a deal has been kiboshed
Right.
based on the feedback of one of them.
Right.
And a deal that probably all of us would have liked 2 years ago.
Right.
So it has it has had effect.
Right.
And I think it's people use too many cooks in the kitchen, and I think that's exactly right. That's what this was.
Right. So let's kind of go back to the GM thing for a second.
Yep.
Right. So Danny Briere right now, interim GM, that title gets removed to just GM, right?
Mhm.
I don't see a world where he is not the general manager of the Flyers. I don't even think they should waste their time with a search. Like just
Mhm.
focus on president of hockey ops and the other people around him, because
Mhm.
this guy has been grooming for this role for quite some time. He's gone about it the right way. He went to business school. He started in the ECHL. He
Mhm.
made his way up. He was kind of like a fly on the wall in meetings. Like he's paid his dues,
Mhm.
and he has the room, I think, because we're going to be going on this rebuild, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, like what that is. He has the time to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, and I think the biggest knock against Danny right now is that he's a former Flyer.
Mhm.
That is hands down the biggest knock. That it's guilt through association at this
Sure.
point in time. If Danny Briere had never played for the Flyers and had an illustrious career with the Canadians or something like that, and by the way, he was a finalist for that Canadians GM job. So it's not like he's not looked at in. I can guarantee you he doesn't get this. Like he's gonna poke around at other. He's valued out there,
right?
And it's not like he's like his line mate. Bless his heart, Scott Hartnell. Who's trying his hand at the broadcast stuff. Great, good for him. But like.
Right.
If Hartnell was like, yeah, I think I want to be president of hockey, it's like, dude, no, absolutely not. You haven't done anything. Danny's clearly a smart guy. I don't care who you are. You don't get into Wharton, which is the top, if not one of the top business schools in the country, and graduate on just pure name recognition. And he's got a young family. He's got roots to the team. He's got roots to the community. And I think the most important thing is that he and Tortorella are together, or at least seemingly together. He was obviously involved in the search for him. He, people are like, oh, is he going to push back on Torts? It's like, I don't think there's going to be. Yes, there will be disagreements, but I don't think it's not going to be like big bag Torts running down. Like you see Tortorella, all the press issues that you see with him are like right after a game, right after a loss. When you see him in like day after or after practice clips, or interviews, he's a totally different person, and he's very level-headed in my mind, like very advanced psychologically.
Well, and if I can just jump in really quick, you're also looking at a Tortorella who is now obsessed with player development.
Yep.
I mean, you listen to him talk, right? Everything about him now is player development. And I think that is a really useful tool for Danny Briere to have.
Yeah.
You know, Briere's he's not jaded to the fact that he's new at this. And to having somebody around who's essentially going to help him through all of this, understanding that that's what they're doing. They're developing a team that'll hopefully go on to win a Stanley Cup. And John Tortorella, I mean, let's be real. He's probably not going to be here that when we do finally reap the rewards, hopefully,
right.
said rebuild.
Yeah,
I mean hopefully he's still like with us, but
right? Yeah, he's the new advisor. That would be trouble.
Well, except somebody, I don't even remember. I think it was one of the national ones. So it was either 32 Thoughts or that one Frank Saravalli does. Mentioned like, could you see him after his coaching days going into player development role? You know, like, wouldn't it be great to like have him kind of set the standard, create a culture, hopefully help develop kind of the new core, then have his predecessor be whoever, you know, if it's an assistant coach now or somebody they end up bringing along, and then kind of bump him up to I don't know, chief development something or other thing.
Chief of player development and, you know, golf shotgun starter, you know. No, I think it's a fair point. And like, I'm not going to worry too much about, I think Tortorella will coach as long as he's, you know, physically able. I think he'll coach until he like doesn't want to coach anymore.
Sure.
And I think it's important. And I know we just kind of joked about it, but I think it's important that you do get that culture change, which Tortorella has pounded home since last summer. He's like, we got to change the culture here. And you know what? Sometimes a top-down culture isn't the best. Sometimes a bottom-up culture it works well.
Right.
And Torts is at that great intersection between player and management.
Right.
And he has the ability to speak both languages, similar to the way that Daniel will have the ability to speak, you know, the language up to the president. The president will then have the language to talk to those corporate gurus smoking their cigars in their ivory tower. And like, you know, and so I think that, you know, from a culture standpoint, we don't want a Comcast culture. We want a Flyers culture. And, you know, and so I think that is an important way to look at it. And to bring it back to Danny, like, I think that is the biggest thing, at least right now, that is going to give him that job and remove the interim, is that like he and Torts already bought into each other.
Yep.
And I think that, you know, if you bring in a new GM, Danny gets passed over, presumably ends up ditching to go somewhere else. Now you're creating a rift between an already like very strong alliance.
Right. I mean, and if the thing is too, is it's like, say, and this won't happen, but say just hypothetically, they moved on from Torts. So like, listen, you know, this isn't, we thought we were going to hire you and we were going to be able to win. It's not going to work. You know, we're going to go with a younger coach. Now you've put the task on your new general manager to not only figure out what the F this rebuild is going to look like and try to get rid of some terrible contracts, but now he's got to go through hiring his first coach.
Right.
And everything that comes with that, where it's like, I feel like Danny Briere is breathing a sigh of relief that that's already taken care of.
Yeah, for sure. There's already one move in place that in my mind is a success. Like our record doesn't show it, but can we watch a vast majority of the games.
Yep.
We are, in my mind, despite the lack of talent, we are a better team than we were a year ago. And that includes during the Claude Giroux, pre-Claude Giroux getting traded.
And that's the environment that you want your team to develop in.
Yes.
You know, I mean, like, I think Arizona has taken a turn this year because I don't watch any Arizona Coyotes games. But from what I hear, their coach has them fighting to win. Like, even when they completely traded everybody, they were still beating teams they shouldn't beat, which is essentially everybody.
Right.
Where it's like, that's the culture that you want to develop players in, not we're going to lose a ton again this year, you know, because when has that worked?
No. Danny's press conference, and he said it, and we said it last week too, that there is a difference between rebuilding and completely tanking and fire sailing. And there's no one definitive way to do a rebuild.
Right.
I think that, we tried it with Hextall. That
Right.
way didn't work.
I don't know.
Some may say that didn't work.
And some people will say that's not a rebuild. And it's like you just said, there isn't one way to rebuild a team, because if there was
Mhm.
one way to rebuild a team, everybody would do it right.
Right.
You
A
know?
lot of things have to go right, and you have to do it. Rebuilding is literally doing it through the draft, but you can't do the Arizona for the past couple years, or the Buffalo for the past few years, or where you're drafting at the top, even Edmonton to an extent for years and years, where you're
Right.
drafting at the top, but then it's like, all right, 19-year-old, have fun out there. You got no support from veterans or middle. Like, there's, you need to still have guys at each tier be getting prime and post prime in order to like maintain that culture and make sure that things don't get like completely out of hand
Right.
for these guys.
And I think too, like, a rebuild to me it doesn't have to be tear it down, but it's a complete change from what was.
Mhm.
And I don't think that that's necessarily just the roster, right? If you look at Tortorella and the system and the culture that he's already put in, right? That to me was the first step of your rebuild.
100%. And that was one of the things I wanted to bring up, is like, this rebuild started a year ago.
Right.
It started when AV was gone, and they were like, yeah, Mike, thanks for playing. You're a nice guy, but bye.
I just want to say your last name for a few more months.
But I agree. We are year one into this rebuild, even though they've refused to call it a rebuild. It's
Right.
finally acknowledged that it's a rebuild, and who cares? Everyone who is like engulfed in the team knows
Right.
exactly what was going on in terms of rebuild of culture as well as standard there.
Right. And I think, like, yes, a big part of the rebuild is like figuring out your timeline, who fits in
Mhm.
that, not only from like a culture, work ethic standpoint, whatever you want to call it, but like also, okay, most likely our new core isn't going to be ready until X, Y, and Z. Like,
Mhm.
does this guy fit? Yeah. So it is about acquiring assets, but it's also like, it's just about finding the right pieces. And to me,
Yep.
that doesn't necessarily mean trading all of the people with some sort of games played, on their stat sheet.
And in our case, and I think this is probably a good lead into our, that topic. Like, we can't, we
No.
cannot, and
No.
we don't have that club in our bag to be like, all right, Sean Couturier, guess what? We know you just came off 2 years of injury, and you have 8 more years on your contract. We're gonna trade you. Like,
Right.
for what?
Right.
Nobody's gonna touch that right now. And honestly, I don't want Coots to go. I like Coots. I don't want him to go.
Right.
But I don't know. How do you want to do this? Do you want to go through?
Well, I think like I kind of want to do it like big picture, and then we can go to some individual
Yep.
names. But like for me, Danny Briere and whoever else needs to sit down. And I would think, even if it's like after the draft lottery, when
Mhm.
you know where you're drafting, because I do think that will shed some light into your timeline, right? If we
Mhm.
somehow get the first overall pick, I do think you're speeding up your timeline a little bit more,
Sure.
because
In
you're
this
looking
case,
at
I
it.
think if we get a top 4,
Yeah, 3 or 4. With the one guy, Michkov, the Russian.
yeah, like that worked out great for us last time. Yeah.
Well, he's really good, but I think he's signed with this KHL team till 2026. So you might go, well, there's our timeline.
Right. And then even if he's coming over, he might not ever come over.
And then you look at your guys and go, okay, I have my, let's say, 28 and over club. Do any of these guys make sense to hold on to? Like, I would argue maybe Ristolainen you hold on to, because he is somebody that can help with the maturation of other players, and it helps solidify the defensive end to a point where it's like you're not just scrambling
Mhm.
the entire game.
Right.
But then you look at like a Kevin Hayes and go, okay, you just stylistically don't fit what we're going to do. Like, we need to move this guy.
Yeah.
Tony D'Angelo, then people like that. But then you look at like the Provorovs, the Konechny's, the Carter Harts, and I want to get into them specifically, but like group of players and kind of go, okay, this is our timeline. We would like to keep you around unless, the assets are something where it's like you can't turn them down. But we also understand if you don't want to be a part of this.
Right.
And Provorov will go, I'm out. And then and then you shop them. But I don't think that like just getting rid of your top players, again, unless the asset return makes sense, I don't necessarily think that like helps this team in a rebuild. Now, some of them are going to have to go.
Right. But I also think it's the reality too of the contracts that they're under.
Right.
And realistically, like, are you getting pennies on the dollar? Like, is it worth trading it
Right.
versus not? And so, I think you're right. Like, I just did like a quick like out, keep, and then like the middle ground, which you kind of alluded to, which I'll save for last. But like, starting with the keep, and I think like this was even like Danny said this in this press conference, like Tippett, Cates, Big Stick Nick, Joel, and Frost.
Right.
I think Joel gets a pass because of the injury.
And because you would sell him pennies on the dollar.
Right. Frost, I don't know which way that's going to go. He's obviously an unrestricted free agent this year.
Right. Is he an unrestricted free agent?
Or restrained? I don't know. One of the two. Whatever. Right. He's on a 1-year contract. He's right. I still don't think he's warranted a long-term deal.
No.
But I don't think he has a lot of trade value either. Right. And if we were going to trade him, I don't know. And then on the defensive side, it's like, all right, you definitely want to keep York, in my opinion, Risto, and then Sealer just for stability. Like, why not?
Right.
Sealer's right. Why not? And then you have two others that, like, forget about, understandably, which are Coots and Cam, which I don't think you can't move them right now. Even if you wanted to, you can't, but I don't even think they would want to right now from a culture standpoint. Right. I do think that's that veteran presence.
It's like you can't move them or factor them into your future right now.
Right. You just don't know.
Wild. Yeah.
And then please note, I left Ellis off this altogether.
Right.
So would you push back on any of those from like the keep list there?
No. It's interesting. You didn't mention like Scott Lawton's name.
So I have him in the middle ground of you want to keep him, but you might have to move him. So
he's somebody. Sorry, he's somebody where it's like I would love to keep him, but because of his age, it's like that move makes sense, especially if you can. I think a contender or even a team just on the cusp would gladly take him and pay a pretty penny. Tanner freaking Janot got 12 picks and a partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah.
Where I do think that you'd get somebody to give a lot of assets to. I don't really disagree with your list at all.
I think then let's jump over to like, okay, these are the guys who are out, who like we want, who I think should be out. You start with the obvious ones like the unrestricted, like JVR gone, obviously.
Right. I mean, all your unrestricted free agents, I feel like.
Braun gone. Like, thanks. You've been a Warrior. Like, you're gone.
Right.
Then it goes into like, Bellers and Lachinsky, whatever the hell, like don't need them. Then you get into Tony, who I think we can trade. He's got 1 year left. I think he's movable. I don't think he provides any value for the short term or the long term. Try to get him out of here.
And you're pretty much not spending any money in free agency, so eat half.
Right. Then you have Hayes and Provy. And those are two that have pretty confirmed voice that they want a change of scenery.
Yep.
I do think they have value. I think Provorov has a pretty decent contract. I think Provorov is movable from a trade standpoint.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think he would provide a ton of value. I'm not saying I want to see him go, but I just feel like, okay, if we're really doing this, like, and we can get top value on that. Okay. That's a chip you have to move.
You get a first round pick this year and something, right? This is the year you trade Provorov for a first round pick and more. But this is the draft. This is the draft that everybody is saying you want to have as many. What's that saying? as many
irons in the fire.
irons. There you go.
There you go.
Irons in the fire. So if that's the case, and I don't think he would want to be a part of a rebuild again.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yep.
Like, unfortunately, we're not going to have somebody who's going to eat his minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, like, we're probably going to take a step back anyway.
Right. Yeah.
The one name you didn't mention, and
Mhm.
it's not necessarily because I think we can move him, is Travis Sanheim.
So he was the one I was going to bring up last in my out list,
Right.
because I think I honestly think that move was Chuck's worst move of all time.
Yep.
Like I think
Yep.
that in my mind is when I lost complete faith in
Hands
him.
down.
Now I heard again, I was listening to Flyers Daily a week or two ago, and they had like, does it happen or does it not? Like playing a little game. It's like, does Travis Sanheim get moved before July 1st when his new contract kicks in?
Right.
His new contract is what, 8 years?
Six and a quarter.
Oh, fuck.
I think so. I might be wrong, but I think it's 6 and a quarter.
And has like a modified no move clause.
Right.
And his contract right now does not. And
Right.
so can you get someone to take that contract? I don't know how you do it. But
Well,
like
and that's
that would be wizardry.
I mean, that's the thing, right? There's a lot of people who are like, well, you do like a contract for a contract, like a Mackenzie Weegar, who's essentially the same deal for Travis Sanheim. But it's like, considering where the Flyers are right now, that doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah.
Like you just take the younger version with that contract, which would be Travis Sanheim as opposed to Mackenzie Weegar, where it's like, hopefully this was just a hiccup and he actually turns into a, legitimate second pair defenseman.
And that's the thing, like that's a possibility. And I think we're all like jaded right now being like, okay, we got to get rid of everyone. Like that this, the fire sale mentality. If we kept
Also
Sanheim,
by the way.
If we kept Sanheim, it's like, all right, man, like you're in it. Like, you got like 3 years at least that you got to perform here. And like he's got to step, like Torts is your coach. You got to figure it out.
Right.
And so like Sanheim is like the big enigma to me. I think the other one is Hayes. I think we can get rid of Hayes.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Yeah, I think you have to from a culture standpoint, quite frankly.
Right. And I understand that he's like our top scorer or close to top scorer, but like, there's a bunch of offensive analogies I could come up with right now that I'm not going to. It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I do think you would have suitors. And again, if you have to eat money, if we're rebuilding, you're not signing anybody on, you eat what you have to.
What does he have left? Does he have 3
years?
left?
Yeah.
It's not terrible. I
No.
mean, it's not terrible. And he's 30, I think. 31? Somewhere around there.
30 or 31. Yeah, I don't think he's any older than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you have to move him. If the price is right for Provy, you move him. Tony, you just dump it at this point. And then you're left in the middle ground with guys I want to keep, but like if the price is top dollar, I think you got to do it. And that's Lawton, TK, and Carter Hart.
Carter Hart's the big conversation that everybody wants to have right now. I mean, I agree with you. TK, again, somebody I want to have around, but I could very easily change my mind if the return is good. And like when I say good, I mean first round pick plus.
Right. So that's the other thing is that I think this year in particular, if we're getting assets for this year, I think it makes sense. If somebody's like, "Hey, what about our 2025 first?" I'm like, "No." I'd rather be like, "Give me your top 2 prospects," or I'd dip into the prospect pool. Tippett obviously panned out okay. If he could ever score a goal, that'd be amazing. But like, he gets his chances, and so like, it's not just the picks. I think we're gonna have to play the prospect game a little bit as well.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And that's where like a Carter Hart trade, and I want to dive into whether or not that's something we do in a second. But like when I think of a team that could use a goalie, I wonder if that's where you can start going prospects. Like Los Angeles, right? They're a team that's loaded with prospects right now. They got Korpisalo for Jonathan Quick in that dirtbag of a trade. that they pulled off at the trade deadline. But like, if they want to get somebody who's like going to be their netminder for the foreseeable future, maybe you can poach a Quentin Byfield, you know, or one of the more untouchable prospects that they've said to this point. But it's like, hey, we've got Carter Hart here. You know, will be your starting goaltender. If you have a decent enough team around him, we guarantee, you know, he'll probably lead you to a few playoff rounds.
Right.
You know, to me, that's what makes the most sense, especially for like a goalie standpoint.
I'm looking up. I want to see how many years Hart has left. Does he have 2 years left?
He's got one more. And
so
they can start negotiating in July.
So, like, if you're moving him, I guess you can move him next year if you need to. So, like, maybe that is one that you sit on.
Well,
if the goal is
agent, he's a free agent after next season.
Right.
And I'm not, I think he's a UFA, but I'm not 100% sure. Because if he's an RFA, we still own his rights.
He's an RFA.
Okay. So you still own his rights. But like, I think that's the big one where you sit down with him this summer and go, okay, this is our timeline. Obviously, this could change depending on, you know, if we hit with certain draft picks, a guy like Forrester plays better than expected, things like that, right? But this is when we're expecting to be good again. This is what we can pay you for that time. We want you to be around and to be, you know, the face of the franchise during this rebuild. But if you don't want to be a part of it, we owe it to you to seek a trade.
Yep.
You know, and get you in a situation that maybe you do want to be in. And kind of let him be a part of that decision, because Sam Ersson can't be a part of that decision right now. You can't let what he did in that small sample size
in the 10 games,
go, I'm comfortable with Carter Hart. I mean, with getting rid of Carter Hart because we have Sam Ersson, because that's no.
I also feel like Hart's value right now is probably the highest that it's been, mostly because he hasn't had an epic collapse like the year that we didn't have any fans.
Right.
He's, you know, knock on wood, he's played almost, you know, a vast majority of the games, and he's still looking at finishing the season. He's been a bright spot, you know. Yeah, we get the blunders like the other night when he tripped over the puck and they scored a goal. Like, that was a real treat. But like, he is a solid goaltender that I don't want to see him go, because I feel like, you know, we always hear that goalies and defensemen take longer to bake. Like, he's 24 years old.
Right.
Like, in 3 years, he will still be in his prime. Like, he still has 6 years of prime goaltending capability in him.
Absolutely.
And so I think you're right. It's sort of like, all right, man, this is what we can do. If you're in it, we want you at this price. If not, we get it. You know, like, let's find something that works and get it.
But we can't pay you $8 million.
Right.
Like, we can't pay you a large, you know, like, I don't even know. We can debate a price at a different time, but like, you need to kind of tell his agent what the price is for how long, and be like, if you really don't feel like you want to be a part of this, then we're going to seek a trade.
And also, like, who is paying a goalie? And not to knock Carter, but like, he hasn't really won anything. He doesn't have championship pedigree on his belt. He has potential championship pedigree on his belt. And, you know, the team in front of him have been good in that excuse, but like, how much more is he going to make on the open market?
Guys like Jack Campbell, I think, you know, he's getting like $5 million, $6 million, you know, like, I think that between the 5-6 million range is probably what you're working with.
What's he at now? Is he at 4? Did I make that up? Let's see. Let me look at it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But like, I do think that like, that's a decision that's very much in the player's hands. And I wouldn't be shocked if he says he doesn't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, he's just under 4. He's like 3.979.
Right.
So, you know, so yeah, I mean, you'd have to pay him. You would assume 5 at least.
And are the Flyers in a position to give that kind of money to somebody right now? You know?
Yeah, I mean, the benefit is, it's like, you lock it up at 5, you believe in them, and that becomes a steal in 3 years when this team does end up going. And it's one position that you're like, okay, it's solidified.
Right. We've got Tortorella and our goalie. Now build the rest.
Right. We got Torts, our goalie. We got a promising backup goalie that we can get for $1 million or something like that. And, see where this goes.
And I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about this over the offseason. So we don't need to do it all right now. But I think the thing I want to leave with is, in your mind, like, what's a realistic time frame for this team in a rebuild? And I know that, like, it's almost impossible to predict because you don't know what's going to happen in terms of the draft or prospects and things like that. But, like, what is something that you can get behind as a fan and be like, okay, I'm willing to take this on if it leads to greener pastures?
I think if we are fighting for a playoff spot, not next year, but the following year, then I'm like, okay, we got a shot at a wild card. I think like a true rebuild, we're probably 4 years away. Like a true, like, hey, we're contenders, but it's 4 years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I want to say like that 3 to 5 window. You got these people like 8 to 10 years. Yeah, that's when it goes bad, buddy. And that's this mentality of like the Buffalo Sabres. Yeah. Where it's like, again, that didn't work. No one is going to sell me on that.
Yeah, 8 to 10 years. So what you're telling me right now is you are predicting what a 10-year-old is going to go for in the draft in 8 years.
Right. And I'm sorry, but I don't buy that this fan base is realistically on board with that. And we are a passionate fan base, and we're not going to deal with 8 to 10 years more of losing. No.
And it's I also the big X factor in there too is Coots and Cam.
Right. I think you buy Cam out at the summertime.
You think so?
I do. Somebody crunched the numbers on a show one time, and it's like, it's not that bad. I think you just, it's too bad that it has to end with an injury. But like,
if he's not, if he's still like debating it, then I can see that. But how does the Ellis thing work too? Like, do we just have to carry that cap until the first day of the season, then we put him on LTIR?
I think so.
That sucks.
Yeah.
What a bust.
I'm not 100% sure how that works. Like, I don't know if you get to a point where it's like, okay, he's essentially retired.
Right.
And that's just like constantly dead cap. And I feel like Arizona can't take on any more at this point.
Right.
Bring it up, G-Dead.
I think the important thing, and you never want to put a firm timeline on a rebuild, in my opinion, because like, okay, when does a rebuild end? There are 31 teams who don't win a Stanley Cup every year.
Right.
And so I think a rebuild, and the goal to it is a rebuild to be consistently in the playoffs. Right. I think is 4 years. I think a rebuild to be a wild card contender is 2 years. And I stand pat with that, man. Like, you look at it, you never know how it's going to hit. Jersey was a horrible team last year.
Right.
Now look at them this year.
Right.
And like, that was a rebuild that finally clicked, but that was a long time coming. But sometimes just the right pieces need to be in there, and then you just start piling on top of that. But we got to shed some of these Jimmy contracts too.
Right. But I refuse to be pro lose. Never. I was listening to Frank Saravalli today, and he's like, Tortorella was an awful hire because it's like, this is a team that needs to lose. They need to bottom out. And I'm sorry, I just don't see that as a path to success.
Yeah, talking about killing a culture, like, that would absolutely murder a culture.
And guess what? If this team outperforms next year and winds up in the playoffs and loses a round, you know who won't be bitching about the draft spot? Me.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm going to playoff round of hockey.
I also think that after this year, after this draft, which has been so touted and such a huge draft, I don't think we're going to see any news about tanking and things like that. Like,
you always do, but
I don't think that that's going to be an option. But yeah, I'm with you, man. Like, I want to see the team do well, and like, I'm going to be frustrated if we do take a step back, but I could deal with it if I could see the vision of where they're going, to make it better.
Right.
So.
And it's like, People complain like Tortorella gave him an extra 10 points this year,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because he's just going to give you a team that doesn't quit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, but then when we finally get that talent with that mentality, that's when you go places.
Yeah.
It's not when the talent shows up and it's like everybody else is used to losing.
Mm-hmm. It's so clear that we don't have the talent, but at the same time, you take the big bad Rangers, you take them to overtime twice, for God's sakes, this season. You lose 1-0 to a beast Carolina team. You
Right.
go 55 minutes with the playoff bound Penguins, and then they end up like opening a can in the last 5 minutes. But it's these guys are playing hard. People are like, oh, it's hard to play against. It's like, you know what? That's something, because we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that in the last 2 years, 3 years.
And it's what we've been bitching about before this year.
Yep.
So,
all right.
So one other thing. You ready? One other thing. Austin Matthews is a free agent the summer of 2024.
Oh, baby.
Clear. There you go. 24-25. Sounds like the year. Clear that cap space. Sign that MFer.
Right.
Boom. Done.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, I think we've kind of done all we can, understanding that this is what we're going to talk about for the next 4 or 5 months.
Hey, it gives us a lot of talking points and a lot of speculation area here.
Right. I mean, I think we won't have much news over the next few weeks of the season, but I think that once summer hits, there's going to be a lot of things that we can dissect. And I think, front office hires will be the first thing.
I think one thing, though, is if Coots does end up playing a game or two this year, I am interested to see that. And because that's obviously a huge X factor that we need to try to get as much info as we can on.
Right. And that it's part of the things you have to factor in terms of, again, I said it a million times, your timeline.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. You doing a dad joke this week? Hey, we didn't even rip on Hoagie this week. What the heck?
Oh, man. Should we, instead of a dad joke, should we dedicate like 3 minutes? No, we'll give him a break this time. I mean, I only like to roast people who are actually part of the show at this point. So,
yeah, he's at this point, he's an advisor to the show. He just pops in and out,
chasing that beer league dream.
I love that he got kicked off his other team. That's so amazing.
Yeah, you get to transfer from the Wolves to the Cobras. What are you, 14? Oh, man. All right. Anyway, I mean, you're on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter. Hey, you know what? Know what I found out? You spell out street in Pod Street Casey.
There it is.
There it is. Who knew?
I mean, and you can find all the rest of us with Pod Street and then Gove and Bob, and I mean the other one you don't really care about. And then the big twist is that Pod Street Bullies account is Pod ST Bullies.
Because we're all about brand awareness on this one.
Keeping it on your toes. Yeah, you can find the podcast on all the various podcast listening receptacles. And then we have a bunch of affiliates. We've got Flyers High and Wide. We've got 5 Minute Major, Hockey Reference. You're going to say something.
Oh, I was thinking High and Wide. Yeah. We're good.
Yeah. No, that's it. There's only 3 of them, yeah?
3 of them. Yeah. They do a great job.
3 of them. We love them.
We love them.
All right. Well, on that note, bye now.
Bye now.